Hello, everyone, and welcome to my first podcast. I'm Katelyn Zawalick, a Sophomore Media Studies student at Cedar Crest College. I currently identify as gender nonconforming, and my pronouns are she, they. And today I'll be talking about transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming people's representation in the media. Since some people may not know, I'll start with a simple explanation of what the words transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming mean. According to the website transequality.org, transgender people are people whose gender identity is different from the gender they were thought to be at birth. When we're born, a doctor usually says that we're male or female based on what our bodies look like. Most people who are labeled male at birth turn out to actually identify as men. And most people who are labeled female at birth grow up to be women. But some people's gender identity, their innate knowledge of who they are, is different from what was initially expected when they were born. Most of these people describe themselves as transgender. The website transequality.org states that some people don't neatly fit into the category of man or woman, or male or female. For example, some people have a gender that blends elements of being a man or a woman, or a gender that is different than either male or female. Some people don't identify with any gender. Some people's gender changes over time. People whose gender is not male or female use many different terms to describe themselves, with non-binary being one of the most common. Other terms include genderqueer, agender, bigender, and more. None of these terms mean exactly the same thing, but all speak to an experience of gender that is not simply male or female. According to Healthline.com, gender nonconforming is a term given to people who don't conform with the gender norms that are expected of them. The term usually refers to gender expression or presentation, that is, how someone looks or dresses. It can also refer to behavior, preferences, and roles that don't conform to gender norms. In other words, gender nonconforming can be used to describe people as well as actions, dress, and ideas. Being gender nonconforming doesn't necessarily mean you're transgender or non-binary, but it could mean both. For some reason, many people seem to think that being transgender, non-binary, or gender nonconforming is rare, so there does not need to be representation, when that is just not the case. A 2016 report from UCLA found that in the United States, 0.6% of adults identify as transgender, which equates to an estimate of 1.4 million. This number is probably far higher, as this report is from 4 years ago and does not take into account teenagers and children that also identify as transgender. A 2021 report from the same institute estimated that there are about 1.2 million people in the United States that identify as non-binary or gender nonconforming. Since we spoke about what transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming mean, let's start talking about their representation in the media. Since 2002, GLAAD cataloged 102 episodes and non-reoccurring storylines of scripted television that contained transgender characters and found that 54% of those were categorized as containing negative representations at their time of airing. An additional 35% were categorized as ranging from problematic to good, while only 12% were considered groundbreaking, fair, and accurate enough to earn a GLAAD media nomination. According to GLAAD, some of these negative representations include: the CBS show CSI featured scenes where transgender murder victims' bodies were mocked while being examined by leads of the show. The Cleveland show on Fox uses anti-trans language and malicious characterizations of the character Anti-Mama. Nip Tuck on FX, which featured a storyline about a transgender woman who regretted her transition, a transgender sex worker being beaten, and an entire season about a psychopathic trans woman depicted as a baby-stealing sexual predator who sleeps with her own son. These types of characterizations are extremely harmful to the transgender community. They play into stereotypes that ultimately could lead to physical harm. And sadly, many of these shows use transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming people as the butt of sick jokes. Now, enough of the horrible representation. Let's talk about some good examples. Today, we're seeing some great representation in the media that include transgender and gender nonconforming actors playing roles that are the same gender they are in real life. Some examples of this being Ben Marks from Good Girl, who is played by Isaiah Stannard. Ben is a child of one of the main characters, and through the show you get to follow him through his transition. Ben is a great example of representation because he is not seen as weak or a victim. He's also not a flat character. He has other character traits other than just being transgender. Another great example of trans representation in media would be Trevor from Shameless. He's a love interest of a main character, Ian. Not only is he portrayed very well, he is also shown as an activist for other queer youth. Steven Universe is a show that depicts some great representation. The show has multiple characters that represent different genders. Garnet, Obsidian, Rainbow Quartz 2.0, and some other gems are non-binary. This show depicts them as strong heroes that can fend for themselves, but also makes their character more than just being non-binary. If you've gotten this far in my podcast, you might be asking yourself why this matters. I feel that telling my own story might make this clearer for you. Growing up, I always knew that I was not the same as the other girls I went to school with. The only problem was I never knew that anyone else was like me. I felt that I was alone, and I shouldn't tell anyone how I felt because I was different. Thankfully, because of media and the internet and the representation that we're now seeing on TV, I know that I'm not alone. And I feel that moving forward this way will help so many young girls, boys, non-binary people know that they're not alone. While doing this project, I wanted to make sure that I got a few different perspectives, so I invited my two friends to speak on what they think about transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming representation in the media.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Faust. I go by Becca. I am 20 years old. I am a communications major at Susquehanna University. My major has a focus in sports media. I use she/they pronouns, and I identify as genderqueer.
Alright, the first question I want to ask you is, how did media affect the way you view your gender identity?
So I think growing up, media really made me kind of put myself in a shell. You see, like, in the news, you see in TV shows, how female presenting people are supposed to act. And I think media kind of has always painted female presenting people in a way where you're supposed to wear makeup, you're supposed to do your hair, you're supposed to wear girly clothes. So I never really kind of broke out of that shell. Like, I kind of just stayed there for a majority of my life where I was afraid to kind of dance on the line and discover who I was.
When was the first time you saw someone in media that reflected your own gender identity?
Wow. Very recently, actually. I think within the past year and a half, actually, since media's gotten more predominant with the COVID-19 virus, is when I've actually seen someone who identifies kind of similar to me in the media.
Do you think transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people have enough representation in the media?
Absolutely not. There's not enough LGBT anything in the media. Like, it's kind of put, like, LGBT identifying people are kind of, like, put away in this box. Like, TV shows don't want to show them off. The media doesn't want to show it off. It's, like, this taboo thing when, like, in all actuality, it should not be. The same thing is a problem for people of color as well. And for a while, it was the same with women. So it's just kind of, people who identify this way are kind of put into a box. And, like, maybe you'll get the stereotypical gay character. Maybe you'll get the stereotypical trans character. But that's once in a blue moon. All right. My name is Raven DePeel. I go by Ray or Raven, mostly Ray. I'm 19. I am non-binary, and I go by they/them pronouns.
How did media affect the way you view your gender identity?
Well, I like to think of myself as one of the, like, OG internet kids. So, like, having the plethora of information given to me definitely, like, made me more open. Like, I didn't even know that gay people were a thing until I got an iPod. So I think it definitely made me more, like, made me more open and willing to hear more things and, like, question things more. So, and that was obviously on the internet, was the first time I heard about, like, multiple genders, gay people, stuff like that.
When was the first time you saw someone in media that reflected your own gender identity?
Steven Universe.
Can you think of a specific character from Steven Universe?
What is it? Peridot. Feminine presenting, but they technically don't have any gender because they don't reproduce.
Do you think transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people have enough representation in the media?
No. Like, you think movies? Like, I know there's, like, niche movies that have stuff like that, but it's not regular representation. Like, go outside and touch some grass. There's, like, real people that don't all have short blue hair that exist that are gender non-conforming. Googled, like, non-binary characters in movies and TV shows because I could not think of anything other than Steven Universe. And all the shit was, like, either made in 2020 with, like, shitty stereotypes, or it was, like, weird indie niche stuff that I've never heard of.
Moving forward, I hope to see more groundbreaking representation happen for transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people in the media. I hope that the younger generations grow up in a world that has more representation for minority groups overall.